my main area of interest was interaction design, and then it's been evaluation, and now it's going back towards interaction design again. So I'm interested in evaluation, but so I started off as a psychologist many years ago, and then I've been in computing a long time. So I'm fairly interdisciplinary, and my group does the evaluation work package of the EQ project, which Ruth and Sandy are in. And yes, so we're evaluation, but we're not really psychologists. And actually, I'm not a very rigorous person, so that's why I'm not really psychology. So I'm going to talk about the evaluation experience, and then I'm going to talk quite a bit about transmedia, which is something that I think is all the time growing in importance. If you look at the job market now, there's many more jobs for transmedia than there were. And then we're going to talk about something we call transmedia evaluation, that we kind of stumbled across transmedia a little bit by mistake, and then we've taken a lot of the sort of the philosophy rather than the actual media from transmedia to apply it. And I'm going to talk through quite a lot of examples of how you can use transmedia or the transmedia approach to embed evaluation. And then I'm going to talk at the end again about design. So when we think about interaction, whether it's a game, whether it's an interactive story or whatever, what we're expecting is to have the user is expecting to have a lovely time, right? So we're all having a lovely time with the interaction. So we're having this lovely time with the interaction, but we have to evaluate. So we've got to find out, there are reasons to evaluate, obviously. We've got to, although sometimes I have to say there doesn't seem to be very good reasons to evaluate, but we're all meant to evaluate, so we're going to prove something, see if it works, and so on and so forth. This sort of thing where we're looking for increase in footfall or return on investment, that's very much from the social networks. And also we might be evaluating, as some people are now, for engagement and fun. So, who are we evaluating for? We're certainly not evaluating for the users, because they don't care. We're evaluating for ourselves, particularly PhD students or people at that level. You build an application, you have to evaluate because you won't get your PhD if you don't. And then you've got your supervisor for people like me, like academics. You've got your managers saying, what about the ref, where's these papers? The funders have this scientifically sound evaluation that they're always rabbiting on about. And then commercial stakeholders are evaluating to see if it's going to be a goer in the market. So what evaluation is it's separate, it's discrete, it's something we do to participants. It's empirical and experimental and scientific. Whether it is all these things, I am a little bit, I don't really believe it is all those things. And we also use what are called user-centric methods, user-focused methods, but the only thing that's user about them is the fact we do them to users. And if you are part of a funded project, it's like death by evaluation. Hours and hours of evaluation instruments. We had an application, it had a long life, thankfully now deceased, or it might still be alive, but, and we had this application called Fear Not, where the interactions, and it was a lot of software, 30 minutes, good quality interaction, 3 times at the very most. The evaluation took at least 2 hours, more than the interaction. So we evaluated it to death. And the users did complain. They were children. They weren't happy about being evaluated. They weren't happy having to fill in 20 pages of questionnaires. You can see I wouldn't be happy filling in 20 pages of questionnaires. In that case, what are we evaluating? Well, we're evaluating the evaluation in many ways, because we're not evaluating the software, not if it's so long. So what we see with an evaluation is the user goes from engaged, immersed and fun to being not a happy person. So I have to say that's where I started from in evaluation, thinking, why are we doing all of this? Why do we need to know all this stuff? So that's where we started from, and surely life should be fun. So with evaluation, we've got these 2 distinct groups. We've got the R&D team, or the developer, and we've got the users. We've got 2 aims. We want to provide useful evaluation results, and we want to still ensure that users are enjoying themselves even during the evaluation. So with narrative is the one thing that naturally lends itself to evaluation. Because although there is some talk about gamification of evaluation and so on, and there is some interest in that, and there are some bits that work well, narrative more than anything else really lends itself to creating a fun evaluation. So with narrative, there's lots of points. You can stop it and have other bits of narrative come in that make sense. So it's very easy to make things sensible within evaluation. And also there's an infinity of extensions to any story. I mean, when you look at any story, there's so many things that people could... I mean, you think 50 Shades of Grey, and what has that got to do with Twilight, really? Everybody's saying, oh, I haven't read that, don't know. But for those of us, people who have read it, that is meant to be derivative from... And I have to say, I haven't really read it, but it doesn't look like Twilight, which was about vampires. So I don't know whether I missed the point, but I kind of didn't get that. So, but yes, and that was fan fiction from there. So with transmedia, which is a kind of sort of a new... It's a new sort of way of considering narrative and how people tell stories and think about things. And it's what really... Because there's some confusion, certainly, about what is the difference between transmedia and multimedia and digital media and virtual media and all of these things. And what it really means is that you're going to have different sorts of media at the same time. And there is some great examples of transmedia. And transmedia now, as we see films coming out, that it's critical to films and to actually have a transmedia presence to ensure that people are interested. So there's a lot of drip, drip, drip and building. I think Cloverfield did it a lot. Prometheus did. So there's these films where they're really pushing, it's like PR, but it's more interesting than posters in the bus stop. So every element of the media used in transmedia has to add something and has to make a distinctive... It's not an advert done on a wall, on a screen. It's not that, and on the radio, it's different stuff. Because if it's the same stuff, it's just multimedia, it's just multiple ways of seeing the same thing. And it's and what is critical, so the people who work a lot on it say that the thing is critical if you don't have a unified feel. So although you should have lots of different media, what you must have is a coherence or an overarching theme, so people can understand how it all fits together. And it has to be authentic. So if it's about 18th century, it's of an 18th century romantic story, it wouldn't be very authentic to be having tweets and things like that, because it doesn't fit the story. So the best transmedia fits the story very, very well. And most transmedia is towards kind of sort of post-Holocaustic and that kind of sort of sci-fi, much more than an old-fashioned sort of theme. So some recent examples, you see them quite a lot. It's very much aimed at kind of the late teen market and sort of the young adult market. Because when you talk about it to young people and you say what it is, they know what you're talking about. Whereas people my age don't. So that's quite good. So Skins, which I've never seen, which was on E4, which you've probably seen because they're young. You had, as well as the telly programme, you also had iPod playlists, you had video logs, and you had these social networks, and you could talk to them on their social net. You could go onto the Facebook page of people and put stuff on, and they responded to it. So that it's not just a thing that doesn't really exist once it's put up. Somebody's actually working on it all the time. And then this one's really good. I haven't seen this either, but what they did was really good. They had Hunted, which I imagine lots of people have watched. I don't watch very much telly, but that's the problem. They had this organisation within Hunted called Byzantium. And what you could do is, I'll beat the website, you could go to this website called byzantiumtests.com. And on that website there was 5 tests. And they're just like psychology tests, like personality tests, things like that. And you have a go at the test, and it says, oh, first test, you're in the top 20%. Oh, you think I'm quite clever, top 20%. Then you do the next test, top 15%. And at the end, you're in the top 1%, except everybody is in the top 1%. So it's quite funny. So they do that, but it makes you very interested. Oh, I was quite keen on that. I think I'd have watched it if I'd done it in time. This is although it doesn't work anymore online. This was a thing done by Lance Wheeler at the Sundance Festival, and it's called Hope is Missing, and it's also called Pandemic, but the website's called Hope is Missing. And what they did, they had 120 hours during the Sundance Festival where people took part in a pandemic, where there was this disease, where people. And this was people sort of responding to what was going on, whether they were all right and whether they were frightened and all this. And they had to find bottles and things to stop the infection. And I've seen him speak about it and also videos from the event. And so it was transmedia, where it wasn't just media as in screen media or whatever, but it was physical objects. So people had to go and you could, the phones were ringing, as you were walking past the phones in the street, the phones were ringing, and people had to answer the phone and do things, and that affected the pandemic. And that's, and he's done quite a lot of these sort of stories where it becomes a temporarily bound story, where it only lasts for a certain amount of time. And that's really great, the whole idea of it, and how, and when you see it, you had to take your bottles of water that you got, there was special non-radioactive water or something, you had to take them and scan them somewhere. And people did, people actually joined in, people really, really collaborated in it. And with that you can see there is real scope for doing something like evaluation in that kind of space. I mean, he wasn't evaluating, it was just, it's not that far different from evaluation. So when a user experiences, unlike evaluation, when a user experiences transmedia, it's fab. It adds value, it's fun, it's interest, adds a lot to the story. You see it quite a lot with authors where they have additional story arcs going on, where people don't write enough for a full book, but write little bit. And even now, increasingly, you see people say, "What story do you want to know?" And I'll write you that one and put it on the web. There's also a lot of sort of enfranchisement with it, that people feel kind of part of it in a way that they didn't. Like in the past, you used to go and see a film, and you didn't feel part of that film. Whereas now you think, I can come out and do my own bit, add it to the web, and blah, blah, blah. So people feel very interested in it. So we went to see Lance Wheeler. That was the first time we'd heard of transmedia, actually. We saw him in 2011. And we had a different name for our approach. We called it something different. But when we saw it, and he talked, and we thought, yes, this is what we're doing. So, so evaluation becomes part of the experience, where the experience of any, I mean, I can't think of a single reason to engage with a story unless it's to have a good time. Even if that good time's being frightened, or whatever, you're still doing it because it's meant to be fun, and you're meant to be happy and enjoying yourself. So, so all the time, in a way, what we're trying to do is evaluate the experience of being engaged and entertained, and that's quite hard to do. So I think that with the transmedia, where it's this whole idea that it should be unified, that the fragments and story elements can be used in different ways to stimulate engagement. We can ask different things. You can have, it offers so much scope if you say everything is possible, as long as it's authentic and makes sense within the context of the application. So, so we took to this idea of using it to be integrated. So you can, and the other thing with transmedia and this idea of multiple threads going on is you can hide things. And then there's always this big discussion about whether that's ethical or not. But we have, in our evaluations, we tell people they're taking part in an evaluation. So they know that they're taking, and then it's ethical. You're not doing subterfuge. You're not giving them something that looks boring. I think is a big thing. And you can also, we have tried to get users to produce the content. Now, idea was to start with that we would get users to create transmedia, but that has not worked. There's much, I mean, you can understand why people create transmedia for Twilight. You cannot understand why they do it for some game that only lasts half an hour, that they're never going to see again. So we haven't managed to do that, but we have managed to get people to be quite interested in what they're doing. So we developed this approach that we call transmedia evaluation. It's all about really how we can make an evaluation happen that feels like it's part of the story, but that produces useful results. Because we're an EU project, our project reviewers and the project officer isn't really interested whether the users have a nice time. They're interested whether we get some good publishable results that we can take to conferences and the journals and make them sort of know it's happened. So we have this 6-phase approach, and we have, in our papers you see this evolving over time. Not only has its name changed, but everything about it's changed. But at the moment we're very much kind of in this, we added this analysis and hindsight. So we have this phase, this is pretty typical of any kind of way of designing anything. And then we have this analysis and hindsight phase where we have to look at what we've done and think about what didn't work quickly afterwards. Because there's no point in having a hindsight phase a year and a half later, because you've got to move things on if they don't work. So I'm going to talk a bit about how we do this, and I mean it's mainly about thinking how can we bring the user and the evaluation into the story, into the narrative. That's really what it's all about. So what we do with it first is we start with the view, because we're user-centric, we start with the view that our users as evaluators are actually the evaluation, are actually the R&D team. So they're our primary users, not the actual end users. And we spend a lot of time, we have spent a lot of time talking to people about what they really want to know. And it's very interesting with research, and most of you will be researchers, many of you will be researchers. When you say to a researcher, what do you want to know from this evaluation? And they don't know. They don't have any idea what they want to know. And I've had that a lot, and it's quite strange. I mean, I find that they want it to work, but it has to be more than work, doesn't it? If it's a narrative, you've got to think, I'm really interested in that and what's going on. So we spend some time looking at how to get people to say what they want, and then we look at how we can engage the user in lots of different ways. And we used to do a lot of participatory design, and a lot of real-world activities, especially with children. Children like a lot to do. We do quite a lot of on-screen, and then we do some bridging activities where you move, a lot like what Lance Wheeler has done, where you move the story from the screen to the real world and back again, and that's quite interesting. And I think there's a lot of scope for that, and I think we'll see more of that in later years. We also have tried this user generation of assets. This is the easiest to get. It's very hard to get people to produce digital assets, but give them a postcard. They're away writing a postcard to anybody. In drawings, give a child in glitter. They're away already happy with it. But this, people don't like doing it if they don't think it's real. That people don't want to, and I can understand that, why people don't engage with social media with fictitious things. The other thing that we do that's really important is we create this way of the user to give us data, which is nice, but then we have to translate it back into a format that researchers can use, because researchers want numbers. They want to point, they want to know it was significant at this level with this degree of confidence. They don't want a load of qualitative data is nice, but only to a certain degree. And that's been turning it back into a way you can publish about it and so on. It's not time consuming, particularly, it's just you actually have to put in time to do it. Once you've thought about how to do it once, you can do it every time, but you have to think, I've got to turn this back round. It's not as easy as doing an experiment and then just having the data and plugging it in and doing SPSS. You've got to do sort of stages in the middle. But it's just almost everything with evaluation is thinking about it before you do it. And the problem with evaluation, of course, is that nobody has time to think about it. So for us, the key issue, and I think with many narratives, the key issue is the user role. So in a lot of gamey style things, and in quite a lot of interactive stories, the user's the protagonist, and is the most important. Everything revolves around the user, which is quite, but our kind of view is that the right role for the user always? Or in an evaluation, should there be something else? And should they have the same role in the evaluation as they have in the interaction? Or can it be different? So we've looked at lots of different roles. We're quite kind of like, I'm not sure if it's because I've got small boy children and therefore everything's about like the Wild West or science fiction, it's all exciting. I'm not sure if it's that, but we have a lot of kind of those sort of like detectives and archaeologists and space cadets. And my researchers also have male children. I'm not sure if we're very influenced by that. But the key thing for me is that the user role must sound enjoyable. One of our applications we're developing at the minute, the user role is learner. And we're not very happy with that, but we found it impossible to make the narrative. Sometimes you can't embed stuff in the narrative. That's quite a new thing to me, that it wasn't possible. The other thing with the user role is whatever user role you choose for your user, that should be consistent. You've got to work out quite quickly if it doesn't work. And probably the only way to do that is to put yourself in the user role. And all the way through my kind of youth, in learning about HCI and thing, they were all going on about the fact you shouldn't use surrogates, you shouldn't use intermediaries, you should use real users. That's not true. You should have a go with yourself, and if it doesn't work, don't ever inflict a user on it, with it. And yeah, that's quite important, is to get experts to walk through and think, not going to work. And I think that's a very important thing to do before you go anywhere near a user. So when we're doing our work, what we do is we transform the artefacts of evaluation into fun artefacts, really, into nice things. And we define all of our data as being hidden, where people don't know what's happening, like what they do on social networks. And people don't mind. People don't mind giving endless data. And really, and even though it's really obtrusive, things like galvanic skin sensors or anything like that is hidden. Because no one knows what's happening. It's just a thing on your arm or your hand or whatever. You don't, or if you wear any sort of device that records what your biometrics, after you get over how it feels, you're completely unaware of it because you can't tell what it's doing. So we look at the data as either being hidden or homemade. Homemade is where people want to do it, and hard work, that's questionnaires. And we look at them as to how we can change things from the hard work bit towards hidden or homemade. And eventually hidden can be in plain sight because it's a questionnaire, but people don't realise it's a questionnaire. That's quite interesting. So we do all this archetypal branding. So we take something. What we tend to use, because we're not, we are computing people, is we tend to use instruments that have been validated by other people, that are proper instruments for pedagogy or psychology or sociology or whatever. We tend to use proper instruments and then brand them. So that does remove some of the validity from the instrument, but not very much. It's definitely better. Because one of the things I see a lot in computing is people just making up questionnaires. And you see that, I mean, any academic will have had that experience where people just make up a questionnaire and they then pilot it. And even at quite high levels, people are not properly piloting the instruments. Whereas if you use something that exists, your instrument will be much better. And you can make instruments look quite nice. So what we do is we go through it and we transform things, and then we take the user into what we call a transmedia evaluation event, which is a narrative, all I'm saying. I think really it's a live action role play, except you're interacting with something as well, and you might be the only person taking part. But apart from that, it's got a lot of similarities to LARPs and so on. So what we do with our users, we put them into role, and we keep them there. And also you wonder, is it because I like dressing up and pretend to be other people? But I don't know. And we have no disjoint between anything, so everything the user does once we've got them is in role. And people are very good at role play. People will dive straight into role play, they don't mind. So it works like this. So you get a user and you tell them about it. And we call it showtime sometimes. What happens? Everything between the curtains happens between the curtains, and the user is completely in role right to the end, and then they go away. And they're in role as they walk out the door, all the way through in role of whatever role we've chosen for them. And that's, and people really, I was surprised how, and even like sort of, so children are great, but children are very nice at doing that kind of thing, but even adults are very keen to go into role and stay there, and not come out. Yeah, very strange, yeah. So I'm going to give you some examples, because I'm thinking it's quite, when you do it yourself and you're doing your presentation at home, you don't think actually it would have been better to have examples all the way through. So the projects that we've got are that eCircus, which was a project that finished in 2009, I think, and eCube, which was about sort of applications to do with social skills, and one application to do with bullying, which was fear not, one to do with intercultural empathy, which was Orient. And then in EQ, which is the project we're in now, which finishes at Christmas, and that's the applications in EQ are mixer and travel, and they're about cross-cultural communication and conflict and things. And also my research group, we've just started doing something quite different. That's nothing to do with culture and things like that. It's to do with fear, which is interesting. So this is Orient, and Orient was an application of these things called sprites that lived on the planet Orient. It was called Orient the planet, and there was users had this thing called an oracle that which was like a help system for when they got stuck, when it worked. And you can see how old it is. We had a dance mat, imagine. And this oracle worked on Bluetooth, but only if every phone in the building was turned off apart from that phone. So that was fun. That was when you really realised that evaluation was about just saying, it's all right, let's just keep going, which was dreadful. These are screenshots. I mean, it was Bonnie look, and it looked nice. It was. In fact, the graphics were attractive. but it was just, I think often with research projects, people are slightly ahead of their time, and the technology just isn't there, and just doesn't work nicely, because it kept going down a lot. So when we did this evaluation of Orient, these are the questionnaires that we used. And then the Orient lasted about 50 minutes, an hour. We had to train people extensively how to use it, because there were so many devices. It was the first time we'd really used gesture as well, and we had about 12 gestures, like weird gestures like this that people had to learn, and no one could remember what they were meant to do. And even when you gave people sheets, they couldn't remember what they were meant, and then the system didn't recognise it. It was terrible. And then it was awful, but it was all right in the end. And they had this interaction that lasted a short while, but we had this about 10-15 minute training video that was done by Harriet Watt, which was all in roll, and everything was in roll in the training. It worked very well. So yes, so Orient's a planet, and we took the view that our user was a space cadet, was on an internship program at Space Command, which is where we were. So we had this, this was the first thing they got. So they turned up, they walked into a room not dissimilar to this, where there was a thing on the wall with a program of events like black hole diving, and like ridiculous, cheesy things, but that works well, and all sorts of posters on the wall of Space Command's sort of efforts in the galaxy, and had a motto, above and beyond, indeed. And so we had, and there were 13 our little people who did this, and they came in and they filled things in. And they went through this thing, and we gave them a badge, and they were technical. So they did questionnaires, and we gave them badges that said there were various things, that we hadn't looked at the answers, so it was quite it was just to set the scene, but it set it well. And then we had tons of questionnaires, but like this. So all the questionnaires were like this. It was like I think that's the Wright et al. General Evaluation Scale. This is just like a usability questionnaire. This was, you know how you can never get users to write anything on open questions? Well, we did this questionnaire, which looks like a piece of graph paper, but is not a piece of graph paper, it's a questionnaire. And this was filled in by in fact, everybody who ever did Orient filled this in as much as they possibly could. Because what we did was, when they came to fill in this questionnaire, we had somebody came in and said, like, it was the techie person, said, oh, could you fill this in? The boss wants this filled in, could you fill it in? And people like took to it and filled it in, but really, really a lot. We had people writing on the back, pages and pages about what they thought about these, even devices they hadn't used, they wrote about. And that worked very well, and people were very taken by the realness of it. Yeah, so if you ever want to do an open questionnaire, make it look like that and people fill it in. We found from this, we did a lot of questionnaires, it was 9 or 11 questionnaires or something, that the results were really useful. And putting everything in made it better because it kept breaking down. So it was always breaking down, this Orient. You'd be halfway through an interaction and it would just hang. But if you've got like a role play going on, you can have the techie person come and mend it, and it makes perfect sense. Nobody minds that. And also we had no distinction, and we did this test with in Portugal with it was meant for young people, but we did it with 23, 24-year-olds in Portugal. So we did the whole of the Orient setup, and then after it we gave them like an A4 questionnaire, which said, asked them about the evaluation, and nobody realised they'd been evaluated. And it was completely serendipitous. We didn't intend that to happen, but nobody realised there would be. Like when you said, what did you think of the questionnaires? They couldn't think of any questionnaires, and yet they'd done questionnaire after questionnaire. And that was really, that showed how easy it was to use the narrative to hide what was going on. What we did find was, though, if we did everything the same, so if we had Space Command was like the overarching organisation, what we found was if we did everything as Space Command and it all looked the same, that didn't work. What we had to do was to have different bits and bobs, so people were filling in different things, so it felt different.